G'day everyone, True here, and welcome to another African Violet video. Today I just wanted to have a little chit chat about some interesting things that I've noticed with my African Violets over the last month. To start off with, I've got two African Violet leaves that I've propagated in water. This is the first time I've done this, and I've watched quite a few videos on African violet leaf propagation in water, and some people seem to have a lot of success with it, and some people seem to just say the leaves rot and it's a complete failure. So I wanted to have a go at it myself, and so far it's going quite well. These two leaves have been in these ceramic bottles for around 2 months, and both have actually gotten quite healthy, good roots developed. This one a little bit bigger than this one. This one's doesn't look as healthy, this leaf, as this one, and the root system's not as strong, but it's still going, still alive. And I actually just pulled off a couple of leaves, stuck them in water. I didn't even put it in filtered water. I just used normal tap water to see what would happen. And they've actually survived and doing very, very well. It's interesting with this one that it's got such a strong root system, but there's no little baby leaves or little baby plantlets coming on it, just lots and lots of roots, which is a little bit different to when propagating in soil. But I like doing it in the bottles because when you get a leaf that's, a decent size, you can just sit it in there and it just sits just above the water line and it holds it in place really well. So I like the idea of using bottles to do the water propagation. The only thing I would say is that I've heard a lot of people say that if you do water propagation of African violets, not to put any fertilizer in the water, because that will encourage the leaves to rot, and you'll get that rot at the bottom. But so far, water propagation, awesome, really easy, really simple, and they've survived quite well. So that's been quite a fun experiment to do, and it'll be interesting to see how they progress over the next few months, and I'll keep you updated on how they progress. So that's water propagation with African violet plants so far. Now, the other thing I just wanted to have a little chat about today is these babies that I've been propagating, and these are leaves in soil. And I hear a lot of people say that, if the parent leaf dies, do you pull it off, or what do you do? Like, does that mean that you won't get any babies? But actually, I've got several examples here of what will happen if the parent leaf dies. So with this African violet plant, you can see the parent leaf, which wasn't an overly large leaf. It's now died off, and you can see it's completely died. I'm not removing it though. I'm just going to leave it there, and it's had a baby come. So even though that parent leaf has died, it's got a very, very healthy African violet baby plant coming. So I'll just leave that leaf there. When it eventually completely drops and rots off, that's when I'll remove it. But I'll leave it until the plant is ready to completely discard it. And that will grow into a very healthy, strong, happy plant. I've got another example here of the parent leaf. It's dying off, and there are all the babies that have come from it. This one's actually got two parent leaves in this pot. There is another one here that is quite healthy, but the one here that's died off, these are the babies coming from this particular plant, this particular leaf. But I won't remove that, I'll just leave that. There's also another example here of where the actual leaf has come away, but the stem is still in place. But the stem is starting to rot and be unhealthy, but just leave it there because these babies are quite happy, and while they're happy, while African violets are happy, I just don't touch them, I just leave them. And another really, really important tip to give you is if you've tried to propagate a leaf, and it can take several months, up to 6 months, some people even say up to a year to get babies. If the parent leaf dies off, what can actually happen is that a month or two after the parent leaf dies off, you'll see a baby come up. Because what can happen is that down in the bottom of the stalk, under the soil, you'll have those leaves and plantlets developing, and the parent leaf dies off, and it just takes a little while to get up to the surface. So I always think it's good advice that if you have an African violet leaf that does die off and you've been trying to propagate it for a while, just leave the soil for, I would say, probably 6 months, just to make sure, or if you want to, you can, completely tip all the soil out and check if there's any babies underneath it. But I think it's best just to leave it for around 6 months, just to make sure that you don't have like some little plantlets developing under the soil, which is actually what's happened in this case. So if I had have just gone, well, the leaf has died, and discarded this poor little plantlet wouldn't have survived. So that's just a little bit of a tip. So I always say, don't give up on an African violet. Like, even if you've had a plant die, don't give up on it straight away, because you can come back. They can be really quite surprising. So these two here, these couple of plants here, these are actually variegated African violets. And I just want to show you that this parent leaf doesn't have a lot of variegation on it. It has some tiny little bits of variegation along the edges, but the babies that came through, when they first came through, they were completely white. And if you go back and look at a previous video that I've done of these plants, you can see the babies are completely white. So don't remove any of the baby plants from the parent leaf when they're completely white, because if you do, they're white because they've got no chlorophyll in them yet. And if you remove them, they will die, because the plants need chlorophyll to be able to survive. So now you can see these are, 3-4 months old now, these little plants. And what's actually happened is they're starting to get that chlorophyll into them, starting to develop. I still won't divide these up yet. I like to wait quite a while before dividing my babies away from the parent leaf. I just think that you have a better chance of success when the plants are a little bit bigger. But you can see how that chlorophyll is coming into the leaves now, and they're starting to get a little bit more green color to them. And here's another example here. This one's actually an interesting example. This one, the parent leaf has actually died off. This variety is Pacific Sky, and the parent leaf has actually died off, but luckily it's died off after we've had a bit of green come into these leaves. Not much, but a bit, enough that it's survived. So that's an interesting variegated one. This one here, I just wanted to show you because I just find it fascinating sometimes how large African violet leaves can get. I mean, look at the size. Look at the size of the leaf. It's massive. Absolutely huge. Huge. That's my hand. It's huge. Stunning. Absolutely stunning. Okay, now these ones, I wanted to show you this one because I think this could be a sport. This African violet leaf, it's got quite a dark scalloped edge foliage, but then the babies coming through are sort of a light green. Now, that's not to say that they won't develop and become more like this as they grow older, but just at the moment, they look like they're a completely different variety than that leaf. So I wonder if this will be sort of a sport plant where it's different to its parent plant. So that one will be interesting to see how it develops. Now these plants have been here for going on up to around 4 months now. And you can see the parent leaf, it's gotten a little bit older and it's starting to sort of die off a bit, but it's still relatively healthy. But these babies, I just want to say, I don't encourage people to divide their babies up until they're really quite well sized. Like some people say, once you've got 4 well-developed leaves, then you can divide them up. But I like to really leave them get a little bit bigger than that, because I do think often when they're a little bit smaller, there is a higher chance that they won't survive. So I like to give them as best chance as possible. So these ones, even though they're quite large, I would personally still leave them for a little bit longer before dividing them up. And that's just a personal preference. Some people will say if you do that, then they are competing against each other and you won't have healthy plants. I can only go on what's my experience, and with my experience, I've just found that the success rate is much better if I just leave them while they're happy, and when they're a bit bigger, then divide them up. Now, the last 2 things I just wanted to show you are 2 new plants that I've added to my collection. These have just come from my local Bunnings. They're just noids. There's no specific variety name to them, but I still love noids. I think they're absolutely beautiful. This one is flowering. It's just a large standard. It's sort of coming more pinky, the colour blooms in the camera, but it's more sort of purple in real life. And in the coming videos, I will do a video showing you how to divide up because I think there could be more than one plant in there, how to divide up, and when you get an African violet home, what to actually do with it, like to quarantine it, you need to change the soil as soon as you get it home, because the soil that they plant them in for commercial purposes it's quite soggy and not very well aerated and not the best for African violets. So that's one new plant. And then the other new plant that has come home, not as pretty looking at the moment. It did have violet coloured blooms. It's another large standard African violet. This may only be one plant in this pot. Let's have a look. But you can see often when you get the new plants home, they don't always look the best. So this one needs, a lot of cleaning up. It needs all these old blooms removed. It needs to be repotted. And I will probably repot this one into a slightly smaller pot, just because African violets like to be root bound. They flower better when they're root bound, and they're happier when they're root bound. So that's interesting. I've just noticed there's a little mushroom growing in there, a little fungi. Not a mushroom, just a fungi growing in that pot there. So that's how moist the soil often is when you get them home. I don't know if you can see in there. They use a lot of peat moss in the soil, which is okay to use peat moss in your African violet soil, because peat moss does retain moisture and it increases the acidity slightly in African violet and in soil, and African violets quite like a slightly acidic soil. You can see there's another fungi growing in there. And this plant's relatively happy, but I think over time it will be much happier if it's in some soil that's a little bit better aerated and a little bit of perlite in there, and just a little bit of TLC. I think it will like. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm sorry I haven't done a video for a while. Things have just gotten a little bit busy, but I'm going to try and do a lot more videos, or at least one a week if I can, sometimes more if I can get the time. And I hope that you've enjoyed watching, and I hope that this video has been helpful and given you some little tips that might prove useful in your African violet growing. Until the next one, happy, amazing African violet growing. Thank you. Bye-bye.